Hi, Lauren.
Hello.
Hi there. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you well. Can you hear me okay?
Great. Yeah, I can hear you perfectly. That's great. How are you doing?
Good, how are you?
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you so much for making the time to talk. I really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure.
So yeah, as I mentioned, I've been looking into communities of people online who subscribe to terrain theory and who have questions about germ theory. And I wanted to find out a little bit more about your group, but also what first led you to follow terrain theory. And I wondered if you might be able to go into that first of all.
Sure, so starting with how I got into terrain theory?
Exactly.
Sure,
Yeah.
yeah. So it started about 10 years ago. I was very, very ill. I had chronic pain, chronic fatigue, IBS. I had suicidal thoughts, chronic
Mm.
anxiety. I would wake up every morning with chest pains, and then like a long list of other health conditions. I could go on for quite a while. But I was fairly young, and I just was not getting any answers and not getting any better. And I was following a lot of the mainstream health advice, eat whole grains, whole wheat, balanced meals, all of that stuff. We cooked at home and rarely ate out. I didn't have any really major, of the traditional kind of health risks like, drinking a lot of alcohol or smoking or anything like that. But still, my conditions just continued to get worse and worse, and it was very difficult to just experience day-to-day life without, for example, the chronic fatigue and chronic pain. I would wake up every single day and just my whole body hurt, and I was just exhausted all the time, and so it's very hard to live your life that way. But I knew in my heart that humans just aren't meant to suffer this way. So I knew there must be answers out there, and I just wasn't really sure where I would find them. But I just started down the path of looking at every available piece of information I could find. And I looked at things, and I, kind of just used my own judgment and said, does this make logical sense? Does it not? And if it makes logical sense, then I continued in that direction. And so I stumbled upon raw food communities and the idea of returning to more natural foods, mainly uncooked foods, foods which haven't been damaged by heat. And so I started to change my diet, and this led to just almost instantaneous improvement to my condition. So I did like a 3 week like introductory kind of raw food experience where it was smoothies and some salads and big bowls of fruit and everything like that. And by the end of the by the end of the 3 weeks, I felt just worlds of improvement. And so this really intrigued me, and so I started to look into the actual science of it, and I started to really dig deep into it. And long story short, because I can go on for quite a while, I eventually found some of the authors like Dr. Tilden and Dr. Shelton and T.C. Fry and others who write from the it's called the science of natural hygiene. And science of natural hygiene is basically, we look at all of the different parameters that go into health, and we take a large holistic look, and we look at all the parameters of disease, and we take a large holistic look, and we say, well, what are the correct conditions that are required for the body to operate correctly? Let's put those conditions into place and then see if the body operates correctly. And so there's an entire body of knowledge under this, what you would call the natural hygiene, the science of natural hygiene. But it's mostly overlooked by the medical industry because it's just on a different pathway than the medical industry. So, as I went through that, and I went through healing my body, I managed to get all of my conditions reversed, including a golf ball size mass in my breast. And one of the most intriguing things to me was the healing process for that mass in my breast. So when my body started to heal, And specifically to work on that area, I came down with what the medical industry would call a flu, or, cold flu symptoms. And that lasted for 72 hours. And at the end of the 72 hours, my body had broken down the tumor and had completely eliminated it. And I literally went from feeling just terrible to feeling like I was born into a new body. I had abundant energy. Instead of waking up with anxiety, I woke up with joy, and no longer had migraines or headaches. I just felt great. I felt like I was a kid again. And so that then led to me having so much abundant energy that I needed something to fill my time with. And so I started fostering dogs that were seniors that had very serious conditions. So I would take in dogs like Happy, who had a grapefruit-sized tumor on her spleen, and Lizzie, who had multiple mammary tumors. I had Bean, who had seizures, dementia, was blind and deaf. And I started to follow the exact same thing that I had done for myself, which is return them to the natural diet, follow the science of natural hygiene, and returned each and every one of them to pristine health. Now, Happy, the vet said, take her home, bring her back. She's got a few weeks to live. There's nothing we can do for her. She's a terminal case. And they said that the spleen could rupture at any time from the tumor. And instead, we put her on the natural diet. We followed all the principles of healing. We allowed all of the healing processes to progress uninterrupted. And that resulted in her returning to pristine health, all of the cancer gone. She lost all of the weight. She was obese when I picked her up at the shelter. She started running around and jumping like a puppy, whereas the first 3 days that I took her home, I actually had to hold her up to walk. I had to put on a special harness for her because she had vestibular disease so badly that she would just fall over after taking 3 or 4 steps. So I had to carry her around, and I had to, put her in this special harness and help her walk so she could go to the bathroom. And, within a few weeks, she's now running around the yard. She's playing with the other puppies. And so, we just kept seeing the same results over and over again, is that when we follow this science, that everything, all disease conditions, every disease condition that these dogs come to me with, they get well. And so, I kept taking them in. And so far I've had 130 fosters that we've returned to the natural diet and healed. Conditions like hernias, seizures, heart murmurs, obviously, I already mentioned cancer, skin conditions. I had a dog with mange recently. And so, our experience has just been that when we follow the science, the body is able to return back to normal operating conditions. And so that's what led to me to understand that the current model that the medical industry is following is just not correct. Because if it was correct, we would be seeing the medical industry getting the results that we're seeing doing the opposite.
I guess it's easy to look at things in your own life and they feel more convincing, but the experiences of maybe 100, 130 dogs versus the kind of randomized control trials based on thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of people in a population, which suggests to us that there are things called microbes, they can cause disease, and that certain things like vaccines can prevent against them, and that, antibiotics can treat them. What is it that makes you not be convinced by that much greater body of evidence, but be convinced by, I suppose, your own experiences?
Well, because if we're being really honest, we don't have that body of evidence. What we have is certain assumptions that are based on other assumptions, and therefore we put these trials together under the assumptions that, for example, vaccines help reduce the disease of whatever. Like, I don't know, you'd have to give me like a specific study in order for us to have a specific conversation about that. But, what we do see is in the results. Like, for example, we've been asking for studies on the safety of vaccines versus unvaccinated children, And for the longest time, we were told by the industry that that would just be cruel and unusual punishment, basically, that they couldn't do these studies because they couldn't morally not inject certain patients. And so we had to wait until very recently, but we now have that study, I believe it's out of Germany, that shows that the unvaccinated children are actually significantly more healthy than those that have had injections. So, we don't really have the body of evidence that you're stating that we have. We have clinical studies for sure. We have various studies that show pretty much anything under the sun. I mean, I joke all the time, but it's like, if you want to find a study to show that the sky is actually pink, you can go out and find a study. There will be somebody willing to fund that in order to produce that. But what we can see as laymen who aren't part of the financial system of medicine is the results. And so, when we look at our family and we see epidemic levels of cancer, of neurological disorders, of chronic disease, right? We have to look at that and we have to say, well, something's not right. If things were right and correct, then we would be seeing the evidence of them being correct right in front of our faces. Now, any business can create a clinical study that's driven to produce the results that they want in order to promote the ideas that they want. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the customers are going to buy the product and get the same results. So what we look at as individuals, as laymen, as people who are just interested in health and having the conditions of health available to us, is what are the actual results that are being provided. So, I mean, you can show me clinical study after clinical study, but if they're not getting the results, what does it matter?
So to you, because I suppose my thinking of it would be, I couldn't, from my own experience, tell you about the life expectancy of cancer because I only know so many people. I don't know that many people. And luckily in my life, I've known a limited number of people with cancer. So I couldn't look at my life experience and tell you about the life expectancy of cancer. I have to look at, the figures that are produced by the services that look after people with cancer, say in the UK, which show that for many cancers, life expectancy has dramatically increased. Survival rates have dramatically increased as treatments have improved. And I would look to that rather than my own experience because I don't know everyone in the country. I don't experience that many people with cancer. So my ability to have all that knowledge is limited by my own narrow experience. But it sounds like you're saying you feel that looking at your own life is more convincing to you than looking at studies on much larger populations.
Well, it's about looking at things that are for profit and have an overarching result. Like, we don't see medicine improving health conditions. What we see is that the epidemics of chronic disease have continued to increase. The epidemics of obesity have continued to increase. The epidemics of cancer have continued to increase. The epidemics of SIDS immediately following vaccines has increased. The number and frequency of neurological disorders has also increased in direct relation, even though correlation is not causation, but they are in direct correlation with the number of vaccines increasing. So, there's plenty of things that we can look at outside of this sort of bubble of the for-profit medicine information. And, I certainly understand that from your perspective, you've grown up within the model that this for-profit business is the savior of the world and they are here just for our benefit. But there are people who, I always like to say there's two separate worlds. It's much like, you've got your Republicans and your Democrats. You've got your left wing and your right wing. And everybody has their own different lens that they view the world through, right? Or you have people who are biblical Christians versus people who are secular, and they have different lenses that they view the world through, and they live their life in accordance to those. And, so then we have to look at it and say, well, who's getting better results, right? Like, you look at the secular marriage and people are, unhappy and there's a 50% divorce rate, and then you look at the Christian model of marriage and you see that there's 74% of Christians are happily married, right? So you have to look at it and say, okay, well, these each have a different worldview. They're both looking at data, but they're drawing different conclusions. So the conclusions that you draw are based on the information that's provided by the for-profit industry, and their studies are always based on a very narrow view of how do we address this very specific issue in a very narrow way so that we can have a patent on this, so that we can patent the medication, so that we can profit off the medication. Whereas in the natural health community, we look at it as, what is the holistic view? What is the correct operating parameters to put into this body that it will operate correctly? So if you look at, for example, running your car, if you have a diesel car and you go and put gasoline into it, it might run for a while, but eventually you're going to run into problems. So the terrain model is basically, if you put the wrong fuel, if you put the wrong foods into your body, if you put chemicals into your body, if you inject poisons into your body, then that's going to cause breakdown and failure of the body. And the medical industry says the cause of disease is a mystery, but if we put in these injections of known poisons, or we have you ingest these known poisons, that this is going to create health. Now, I don't know about you, but in my life, two wrongs don't make a right. So if a body has been poisoned and then we add additional poison, that doesn't equate to making health. That equates to making the body sicker. But that is the model that the for-profit business is upon, whereas the terrain model and the science of natural hygiene is based on the opposite of that, which is, we know that the body is not operating under ideal parameters. Let's address those parameters. Let's correct the conditions and provide the conditions of health.
How do sort of publicly funded health systems fit into your understanding then? Because obviously there is a profit motivation for drug companies, but there's also a motivation to save money from, universal healthcare systems that do promote specific drugs. But for example, in the NHS, a cost benefit analysis has to be done because their motivation is partly to save money, not to make money. How does that fit into your calculation? And also, how do the huge profits that some people in the natural health community fit into that calculation that's very sort of, profit on this side and natural health on the other?
Well, I can't really speak to natural health as a profit driver, because anybody who's within the natural health field and billing themselves as that's selling a product, is lying to their customers. We don't heal by vitamins or by, adding herbs or other poisonous substances just because they're natural. That entire idea is the same idea as the pharmaceutical idea of poisoning a poisoned body back to health. So I can't speak to that because that's not a part of natural hygiene. Natural hygiene, the beauty of natural hygiene is that it's completely free. The only thing that you provide to the body is the foods that your body is naturally and appropriately designed for. So whatever your physiology and anatomy demands is what is provided. And that means no profits for anybody. It means no sales. It means no, no herbs, no detox tinctures, or all those crazy things that people do. All of that is actually part of the pharmaceutical model, of the medical model, which is the idea that the body is creating these symptoms because the body is wrong, and we must apply poisons to the body. In the natural health community, it's natural poisons, but it's still poisons. It's still something that if you gave to a healthy body, it would make the healthy body sick. So that's the definition of a poison. If we do that in the medical terms, we're going to do it with a pharmaceutical drug, like vaccine, or ivermectin, or hydroxychloroquine, or any of these other ones. And if we do it in the natural health community, it might be using some sort of herb or some sort of vitamin pill. But it's the same broken system. It's the same broken idea of trying to do two wrongs to make a right. As for the public health care, I'm obviously not an expert in insurance or in health administration. But again, when you have a system that is based on profit, regardless of whether they're trying to save money or not, you still are paying for the treatment rather than the results. So, the way I think about it is, if you took your car to the mechanic and the mechanic said, okay, well, here's your bill, it's $1,000, and you say, oh, great, how's my car running? And he says, it's not. Well, what did you fix? I didn't. Well, then why do I owe you money? Well, like, we wouldn't accept that from any other industry, but that is what we accept from the medical industry. And so we have this entire system, and everything that comes out of it is based on that profit, even if the administrators of that system are trying to cut back on the expenses. It's still being paid for, and really ultimately the only difference between a publicly funded and a privately funded healthcare system is where the money is coming from in the closest iteration. So either way, the taxpayers are paying for it. They're paying their taxes into the public health system to pay for the treatments, or they're paying privately into the private insurance, or just out-of-pocket expenses. But either way, the individual is paying for it regardless. So the primary issue is, why are we in this for-profit model, which doesn't provide results for payment? It provides non-results for payment.
I just wanted to ask you a little bit about the group. It's obviously grown massively in recent years. I just wanted to ask you, how you felt about that. Were you pleased with the community that you've grown?
Yeah. So, I took over the group. I didn't create the group, but I took it over back, I believe it was in May of 2020. And the group just started out as a small group of people who understood the fact that the terrain model was correct, and it slowly grew with all the lockdowns and the restrictions. There were more and more people that were interested in just learning the topics that we were discussing, and the group grew pretty steadily, slowly and steadily over the first year, and there was just so many people just entering. They just had questions, and we had answers that we could provide for them. And so it grew very organically and very peacefully. We really had very few people come in and try to disrupt the group or anything like that. But then in the second year, we got a few negative articles written about us, and that really helped to grow the group, because you had all of these people reading these articles and coming into the group and saying, well, no, this actually makes a lot of sense, and oh, look at all the resources they have, and look at all the science that they provide, and look at all the just purely logical answers that are provided by this different model, this different way of looking at health. And ultimately, the terrain model is very common sense based. It's instead of applying poisons to the body, we remove the source of poisons. It's something that people can easily get behind. And it's also, in recent years, I think within the last decade or so, we've had a lot of nutritional science come out that has shown that when people eat the proper foods and avoid eating the more disease-causing foods, that disease conditions are reversed. And so people were already primed with the whole food plant-based movement, and websites like nutritionfacts.org with Dr. Greger. People were already primed to understand that disease is something that we build based on our food choices predominantly, as well as external toxins like things, dirty water and environmental poisons, spraying chemicals in our homes, disinfectants, bleach, things like that. And so people were already sort of understanding this, and understanding that there has to be a different way, a different solution, because everybody's looking at the pharmaceutical industry and saying, well, for every drug that they put out, their commercials are a laundry list of adverse events that occur from taking the drugs. So people are looking at things and saying, well, something's not making sense on that end, so let's look at this end and look at it objectively and ask ourselves, well, does this make sense logically? And so it just kind of grew very organically. just based on that. Like, people would come in the group and ask questions, and they would get logical and reasonable answers to their questions, and so they would invite their friends and their family members, and they would just kind of repeat the process. Everybody would ask a question, they would get a logical, reasonable response backed up with science, and then they would invite more people, and so we just kind of grew out of that.
Mm. There's a lot of advice given in the group, and lots of people coming with very specific scenarios. Um, Health is very complex. Everyone's different. There's lots of things, different things going on for different people. Do you feel confident or comfortable about kind of advising people on their health when maybe they do have a health problem that perhaps you are not equipped to understand or know the best route for them?
Right. Well, your question makes a lot of assumptions. First of all, you said that we're all different, which is just a logical fallacy. I mean, it's just a not factual statement. We are all humans. We are all built exactly the same. We have the same biology and anatomy and physiology. We have the same requirements of health, and we have the same things that injure us. And so the idea that we're all different is actually just a lie. And that's actually something that we encounter quite often in the group, is people don't want to give up the addictions that they have, so they convince themselves that really their body is somehow different than every other human on the planet. But we deal with that all the time with explaining to people. Is like, if you look at every species on the planet, every species has their specific diet. So if you have a zebra, you don't have some zebras out there eating meat. All zebras eat their species appropriate diet. And so humans have the correct conditions that are required for their body to operate correctly. And we don't advise on specific diseases, because disease labels are just that. A disease label is a collection of symptoms. The symptoms are created by the body as a solution to the underlying conditions within the body. The medical industry groups those symptoms together and then calls them different diseases. But ultimately, the organism itself is creating those symptoms as a solution to whatever is going wrong with what's going into the body. So we don't advise on specific conditions. We will sometimes explain why the body is acting in a certain way. So if somebody says, they have a condition that's causing blood sugar issues, we might explain some of the processes in terms of cellular biology, in terms of physiology and anatomy, but we're not addressing a specific condition, because specific conditions are the realm of the medical industry. And that's a legal requirement for the medical industry. They have to label a disease in order to sell their drugs. So we don't deal with the specific conditions. We deal with how to put the conditions of health into place so that the body can correct all the conditions that are going wrong. Because the other thing that the medicine model tends to ignore is that just because there's, say, liver issues does not mean that the liver is the only organ that is not operating at peak efficiency. It means that we're currently seeing some symptoms in the liver that are the most obvious symptoms, and that's what we're keying in on. But it means that the body as a whole is not working properly, because you can't separate one organ from another. The blood flows to every organ, the lymph flows to every organ, the cells communicate constantly. They communicate via the nerves, they communicate to the brain. So, when the heart beats, this affects the liver. When we take a breath, this affects the heart. So everything is interconnected. And so we can't look at things in terms of like, we have this one diagnosis. We have to look at health as a whole and put the conditions of health into place. And then when we do that, the body's able to return to normal operating conditions. And so, when we discuss specifics or specific disease labels, we always explain this, that it's not a specific condition that we're dealing with, but it is a overall condition of the body, because the conditions of health aren't being provided.
So, does that mean that you don't sort of believe in specific conditions? So if someone has epilepsy or a specific breathing condition or type 1 diabetes, the mainstream understanding would be those people have a specific health condition where they need different treatment. I might be fine to eat peanuts, but if you have a peanut allergy, you need to be treated differently. But are you saying you don't sort of believe that those specific conditions exist, or just that you think that everyone, can do well with the same things?
Well, there's the same conditions of health that are required whether you have epilepsy or you have cancer. Now, we of course believe that people get the medical label of epilepsy, and that medical label includes a specific set of symptoms, and those specific symptoms are unique to patients with epilepsy. Although that person with epilepsy might also have 10 other symptoms or conditions, but that one specific label does exhibit those specific conditions that are in the definition of the medical model. Now, as far as like peanuts or a peanut allergy, that would be removal of cause. So if somebody is having an allergic reaction to a peanut, which peanuts, by the way, are not a natural food of humans, so it's understandable that we would have adverse reactions to them, just like most of the allergens, like dairy. Dairy is not a natural food of humans. It is the food for baby calves within a very narrow point in their life where they are growing very rapidly and need the very specific nutrition that turns a baby cow into an adult cow. When we put things into the body that cause, for example, an allergic reaction, the removal of cause would be not putting that poison into the body. So, we would arguably, yes, treat that person differently in terms of, okay, you have a specific allergy to peanuts, so you need to immediately stop eating peanuts because peanuts are toxic to you. So we would say, like, there's much more urgency for you to eliminate this thing that is causing the direct response that your body is having. But we wouldn't say, well, you are, this other person who has epilepsy, hey, go eat a whole bunch of peanuts. Because that just doesn't make sense because you're putting conditions of disease on that person. So, when we look at the conditions of health, what we understand as the terrain model and, under the science of natural hygiene, that there is a holistic issue going on. And so the body might express symptoms in a different way, but all of the symptoms ultimately are coming back to a root of saying that the body is not functioning properly. And why is it not functioning properly? Because the conditions are not proper that are being provided. So, if you have one person that eats a lot of refined sugar and you have another person that eats a lot of animal tissues, they're going to probably end up with different disease labels. They're going to probably end up with different symptoms that they're experiencing, and their symptoms are going to grow and develop in different ways because they are eating things that are not appropriate to the body, but they are eating them in very specific ways. So, one person is overloading on refined sugars and the other is overloading on fats and proteins. So, in both conditions, the conditions of health are not being provided. The person's not eating their natural diet. They are putting things into the body that are harmful to the body, and the body is responding to that by creating conditions of disease in an effort to maintain its life and to, as best as possible, correct those conditions. So if we have somebody who is eating anything that is outside of the natural diet, we know that person is going to end up with disease conditions. But what conditions their body expresses is going to vary based on their, personal preferences, their habits, their genetics, like, what their previous generations ate and how that weakened the body from generation to generation. But regardless of what symptoms they're expressing, we still can get back to the root of the wrong conditions are being provided, and we can correct the issue by providing the correct conditions for health. So, we can set aside the entire disease labels, disease model, and say, are we putting conditions of health in place? If we're not putting conditions of health in place, we cannot expect health to exist.
And are there ever situations where you think that, a medicine would be appropriate as well as a healthy diet? If someone gets exposed to what I would think of as a bacteria, a toxin in water, it's all very well to have a healthy diet, but in that moment, that healthy diet may not be enough to help you, and you may need to take an agent which is going to kill that microbe in your body in that moment.
Well, so let me ask you this. If you took an agent that killed that microbe, how would it avoid killing every other microbe in your digestive tract that is required for health?
Yeah, sure. I think, people are increasingly understanding, antibiotics kill good bacteria as well. And they may be needed to be taken in conjunction with a probiotic, but you make the risk benefit calculation that in that moment, the bad bacteria is dangerous enough that we need to kill it at the expense of a good bacteria.
Mm-hmm.
In the same way as, my understanding at least, chemo, of course, it is toxic. But if you are that at risk, you take the calculation that you kill some healthy cells to kill the bad cells, and we've seen in that has prolonged people's lives.
Well, have we though? I mean, the data has changed. The time limits have changed, but the results have not really changed. Chemotherapy is a known carcinogen. That means it causes cancer. We know that it causes cancer. So giving it to a cancer patient, we don't have long-term success. What we have is a shift in the level of data. So instead of providing 20-year studies, we're now being provided 3-year studies. And we're saying, okay, well, within 3 years, the person survives, therefore it's become more successful. And that's just a manipulation of the data. So we have to look very carefully at whatever results are being put out and ask, okay, well, is the data really reflecting the conclusions that are being drawn? And I think, in cancer, that's pretty obvious that it's not. But, everybody's going to have their different perspective based on where their personal opinions lie and how they perceive the data and how they decide to interpret the data. But let's get back to the bacteria. So for example, if you drank water that was contaminated, your body is going to respond because your body has natural defensive mechanisms. So if we drink something that has bacteria in it, we're going to get diarrhea. Now, what is diarrhea? Diarrhea is the body flooding the digestive tract with water in order to flush a toxin or poison out of the system more rapidly. Now, if we go the medical route, the idea is going to be, well, give antibiotics to kill the bacteria, which are also going to kill all of the good bacteria that's in our system. Now, this is assuming that we even ingested bacteria. They're just going to assume that that was the cause, and ignore, every other possibility, like the person ate food that didn't agree with them, or, drank some alcohol, or, there's so many factors that could create the symptoms. But they're going to assume based on maybe they took a water sample, or maybe there is a common bacteria that's in that area, and they're going to assume. So their treatment is going to be an anti-diarrhea medication. So an anti-diarrhea is something that stops the body from creating its defensive mechanism. So the diarrhea is created by the body. It is an action created for the benefit of the body, to benefit the body in order to get the poisonous substance out more rapidly. Now, the medical treatment is going to be, in most cases, to stop that. So we're working against the body. The body has already initiated the solution to the foreign bacteria coming into the system by flushing it out. And then the medical industry is going to apply things that kill the bacteria that is supposed to be in our system, and it's going to stop the flushing of the toxin. And so, we'll take that for maybe 2 or 3 weeks until the body has slowed down so much that we're constipated, and then the bacteria has to sit there in the system along with all of the dead bacteria from all of our, all of our cells that we require, all of that stuff that actually digests our food. And then now we're being told, well, we know that it wipes out the internal digestive bacteria that is required for our health, and we are also seeing now confirmation that can lead to depression and anxiety and mental health disorders and neurological disorders. And they're now even calling a condition leaky gut. So we know that, and then we also know that they're developing superbugs from that condition as well, because nature always seeks to survive. So if we keep poisoning nature, it's going to keep building itself stronger until it can survive whatever poisons we're throwing at it. But what we haven't done is remove the cause, and we haven't allowed the body to operate normally, and we haven't put the conditions of health in place after the fact, right? So what we're told is not, okay, well, you had, diarrhea, now you might be dehydrated, so you want to eat some watery fruit to help the body rehydrate. Instead, we're told to, take a bunch of pills for several weeks, pills that would arguably make a healthy person sick. So we're not addressing the underlying cause, and we're putting in more things that are damaging the bacteria. And we're working against the body's natural defensive systems. So, the same can be said with, viruses. Is we have all of these natural defensive systems. We have, if something was trying to get into our body, we have mucus in our nasal passages. We have the ability to sneeze, to expel. We have the ability for our nose to run, to expel. If we eat something that is an irritant or toxic, we have the ability to vomit, to expel. So our body has all of these avenues in which it has defensive mechanisms that are expulsion mechanisms. So if anything that goes into the body intelligently deems that to be not beneficial to the body will then initiate an expulsion, and that material will come out. So, you eat rotten food, you're going to vomit, and your body's corrected the situation. So the cause was the rotten food. It went into your stomach. The body took action against it. It vomited, and now the rotten food is no longer in the system causing any problems. So you see how there's a difference in the mentality of what the symptoms mean. So in medicine, the symptoms created by the body are always wrong and bad, and we need to apply poisons to stop them. Whereas in the terrain model, the symptoms are created intelligently by the body as a defensive mechanism or as an expulsion mechanism by the body in order to correct the conditions and remove the cause.
And I've noticed in the group, there's lots of lively discussion. There's also quite a lot of sort of like blame or shame, you might say. So especially I've noticed people talking about kind of their kids. If they say, my kid's got a temperature or whatever, there's a lot of people sort of saying, oh, well, you've done wrong, you've exposed them to a toxin, you've eaten the wrong thing. When I guess they don't know a lot about that person and their individual circumstances and their individual lives. What do you think about that as the tone? Is that something you support? Does it ever concern you when you see those kinds of maybe slightly more sort of conflict type things taking place?
Well, I mean, I can't say that I've really seen a whole lot of that, so I can't really speak to that as far as the group. I would say that the vast majority of our members are, very compassionate. They're, trying to teach people the right way, and I don't think that, I know that my attitude is that, we're all taught the wrong things and we all live the wrong way for a very long time, and then when we learn something new, we do better. And so, the overall attitude of the group, and, you can see this in the group rules and the group description, is that our intention is to be very compassionate to people, to understand that no one has been taught this information, and everyone is going based on the information that they are, given by society, and people can only do as well as they can based on the information that's been provided to them. So as people know better, they do better. I don't know specifically what posts you might be talking about, so I can't really, communicate to that. But obviously we have over 30,000 members in the group, and it's also a public group, so people who are not members of the group can come in and comment. And so we often have people who comment wrong information. We often have people who will recommend things like colloidal silver or ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine or other poisons, and those obviously are just completely against what the model says and does and provides. But you can't control every single comment on Facebook. That's the downside to having a Facebook group, is that you have not a whole lot of control over excuse me, how people comment and whether those comments are correct. So that's why we provide the resources, that's why we provide the books, that's why we have the Life Science course, which is a 3,000 page PDF that walks through the entire science of natural hygiene. We have over 30 books in the group for people to resource and reference, and we post regular articles. So we are aware that we can't police everybody's personal thoughts and opinions. But we do our best to comment as moderators on each post to give people the direction that they need. So myself and the other moderators will typically leave a moderator comment, unless we feel that it's a post that has been answered significantly enough times that the majority of the members are able to answer it themselves. But again, it's Facebook, so you can't control how people, like, there's always going to be people who are rude or who are just coming in to disrupt the group, or who are coming in with their preconceived beliefs and just want to argue and don't actually want to review any of the material. But I've found that over the years, most of the people that actually join our group are very interested in actually learning the science and understanding it on a deeper level. So most of the people who have been in the group long term do take advantage of all of the resources that we have. They read the clinical studies, they read the books and the files, and even the older files from the original Navy studies on contagion that showed that the flu was not contagious. So people are people, and you're not going to change them. But we try our best to just have a general attitude of compassion and education. And I just tell people our group is not a debate group. It's a social learning group. It's, if you're interested in coming in and learning the terrain model of health and seeing if it makes sense, that's what the group is there for. So people can come in, they can read it, and they can make their own decisions.
Yeah, that's interesting. I always ask this to scientists. What if it's the particular thing that they study, or theory that they subscribe to? It's like, what would it take for them to change their mind and realize they were wrong? And I think mostly, high quality, trustworthy scientists will say, oh yeah, if so and so study came out, or I would change my mind if the information changed. What would it take for you to change your mind about terrain theory? What would be the circumstances in which you would say, actually, the germ theory model is correct, I was wrong?
The laws of nature would have to change.
What do you mean by that?
I mean, natural hygiene is based on the laws of nature. It's what we observe in nature. This is actual science versus consensus science. So what we observe in nature as being the laws of nature would have to change in order for terrain model to be wrong.
So there's no circumstance in which, a scientist you trust who works in a way that you could verify says, hey, look, we can see these microbes under a microscope. We isolated it. We gave it to an animal model. They got sick. We gave it to a human. They got sick. We watched it spread through a population. We're pretty sure this is as good as it gets. Would you still reject that?
Well, I mean, if that was possible, because again, the laws of nature would have to change, and bacteria would have to change its entire nature. But if...
What do you mean by that? Because the laws of nature, what are the laws of nature that mean that a microbe couldn't exist? Just because I don't understand that.
Okay, well, you're assuming I'm saying that the microbe doesn't exist. I've never said any such thing. We know that microbes exist. We know that bacteria exist in a healthy body. We know, for example, that MRSA is, considered one of the most deadly hospital bacterias, but we know that it exists in every healthy human. So we know that the microbes exist. We're not at odds with what's seen on a microscope. We're at odds with the conclusions drawn. So the conclusion is, let me give you a little analogy. Maybe this will help to clarify things, right? In the germ theory, we have a pile of garbage and we have flies. The germ theory says the flies cause the garbage, kill the flies, and that will remedy the problem. The terrain model says clean up the garbage and the flies will go away. Does that make sense?
Yeah, although I don't think it's an accurate depiction of what germ theory is, because germ theory would say the garbage is the problem.
No, germ theory says the germs are the problem. We're going to apply antibiotics or other poisons to kill the germs, and then that's going to correct the conditions. It doesn't say clean up your diet and then you'll stop getting sick. In some ways, they've made some concessions to that by saying that, you'll have better immunity if you eat better, or if you eat healthier. But it doesn't say, because that's essentially the difference between germ theory and terrain theory. Is germ theory, it says the microbes are the problem exclusively, whereas the terrain model says it is the terrain that the microbes are living in that is the cause of the explosion of bacteria. So, for example, if we eat an apple, the bacteria in our digestive tract that is used to digest that apple expands in population in order to address that immediate issue. So the apple is broken down by that bacteria. The bacteria carries the nutrients from that apple through the digestive tract, through the walls of the digestive tract and into the bloodstream, and then it's distributed out to the cells. When that apple has moved through the system, the body brings down the bacteria levels in that area because it no longer needs them to break down those tissues. So in an injury, for example, say, like, I'll give you an example. About 6 weeks ago, I got bit by a dog. I got bit by a 90-pound Staffordshire Terrier on my leg, and he punctured me in 3 places. Now, the bacteria in his mouth should have created problems for my body, right? That's what the germ theory says, that it should have created problems for my body. And had I gone to the medical route, I would have applied various drugs recommended by the doctor to kill the bacteria from the dog's mouth, as well as to kill any bacteria on the wound. And then, that would be required for the wound to heal. But I didn't do any of that because I know that the bacteria is flushed out by the bleeding out of the body. So the body has a defensive mechanism for external bacteria. The body bleeds outward, and that pushes all debris outward. And the bacteria within the system is being brought there after the fact as a part of the healing process, because that bacteria is very specific to the body in terms of eating up dead and dying tissue. So that bacteria only eats the dead and dying tissue. It doesn't damage any of the healthy cells. It just breaks down the specific thing that it is, that is its nature. That's its process. That's its, what it is designed for in the scheme of things. So when the dead and dying tissue has all been eaten up, that bacteria population naturally subsides and the body returns to normal operating conditions. So, with the dog bite, it took me about 2 days of staying off the leg, and then I was back to, running around like normal, and the wound healed very quickly, no stitches required, even though, the medical industry probably would have put between 10 and 20 stitches into it. So, we have to look at what the natural processes are, right? We know in nature, bacteria is neither good nor bad. Bacteria is just doing its job. Bacteria is the recycling team of nature. They come in, they break down, and then they recycle it into smaller pieces that are then reused. So, for example, a animal dies in the woods, the bacteria moves in, breaks down all the tissues, returns them to dust. The bacteria isn't bad. It's not invading the body. It's not attacking the body. It's just doing the job that the laws of nature require it to do. And so, when we look at the laws of nature, the things that are unchangeable and immutable in nature, that is where we get our foundation. That is where we say this is right or wrong. And if we're saying something in medicine works in contrary to what we know is observable in the laws of nature, then we would have to say this is wrong. We have to say that this man-made thought cannot be correct because it's in opposition to nature.
Thank you so much for explaining that, for your time. I really appreciate it, and you making the time to talk to me today.
My pleasure.
Thanks, Lauren. And yeah, I'll stay in touch and let you know kind of what the plan is. But for now, have a great day.
All right. Thank you. You too.
Thanks so much. Take care.